This year, we've seen a range of devices from Samsung, such as the S20 lineup, and we're also aware of the upcoming Note 20 range. So, how does last year's S10 lineup compare? Let's find out. In front of me is the S10 Plus, last year's S10 series, the biggest model out there. And in front of me, recording, is the S20, the base model of the S20 lineup. Now, to start off, I'm not going to be doing the smallest variant of the S20 lineup, the S10e. I'm just going to stick to the S10 Plus and the base S10, and then the S20, S20 Plus, and S20 Ultra. Now, to start with screens, the S10 has a smaller screen than the S20, with the S10 starting at 6.1, whilst the S20 is at 6.2, which is a very small difference at 0.1 inches. Whilst the S10 Plus, which is the one that you can see right now, is 6.4 inches. Now, this is diagonally, it goes from one side to the other, 6.4 inches. Whilst the S10 Plus is 6.37 inches. So with last year's Plus model, you do get 0.03 bigger inches, which isn't much of a difference, but we'll move on to the other specs later. Then the biggest model this year, the S20 Ultra, was 6.9 inches, which is significantly bigger than the S10 Plus, which was last year's bigger model. Now, moving on to battery, which is a key aspect, the S10 base model of the S series is 3,400 milliamps, which I have heard from reviews has lasted people very long, and still to 2020 has been doing very well. Same as my S10 Plus with 4,100 milliamps, has still barely dropped. I cannot tell a difference. Now, moving on to the S20 lineup, the S20 battery, so the base model is 4,000 milliamps, which is a full 600 milliamps bigger than the S10. And moving on to the S20 Plus, it's 4,500. This already beats the S10 Plus by a good 4,400 milliamps. Just 400, not 4,400. And the S20 Ultra is a whopping 5,000 milliamps. Now, this is massive compared to both the S10 and S10 Plus. Phones do need it because of the 120 Hz refresh rate. With screens, both lineups have WQHD plus resolution, which are some of the best screens on the market right now. Like I said, the S20 lineup does have 120 Hz and 240 Hz touch sensitivity, whilst the S10 lineup has 660 Hz, like most phones these days, and it is WQHD, and it only has 120 Hz touch sensitivity. Now, moving on to one key aspect is cameras. Now, the S10 only has 10 times zoom compared to the S20 lineup's 30 times zoom. Unlike the S20 Ultra, which does have 100 times zoom, but that will be a later subject. The S10 lineup has 12 megapixel telephoto camera, 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, 10 megapixel selfie camera, and 8 megapixel depth camera. Very impressive specs for any phone. But then when we're moving on to the S20 camera, it's a 30 times zoom, so that's 3 times further than the S10 series. 64 megapixel telephoto camera, which is a separate setting. An 8K recording option, so you can record up to 8K, but only at 24 frames per second. So it's very low, not very practical at the current point in time, but it is still a very fun feature to use. The front camera is 12 megapixels, so it is upgraded a little bit from the S10. The depth camera is only on the Plus version, the Plus variant of the S20, so you aren't getting any depth camera on the S20, but it's still an amazing camera. And you've got a 12 megapixel ultra wide, so that is the same as the S10 and the S10 Plus. Now, moving on to the S20 Ultra, you do have an option for 120 megapixels and 100 times zoom, which is optional if you want to use it. Now, these aren't very practical, and the S20 Ultra has had issues of stabilization, whereas the S20 and the S20 Plus use a separate autofocus system, so they do much better with focusing on objects. So if I bring this in close, it does focus well. It doesn't blur the objects because it knows what's in and what's out. Now, to finish it off, both phones are very durable. I've had the S10 Plus for a year, and there's minor scratches on the edge here. I have got a few bumps, but that's from when I had the phone and I had no case. Apart from that, the phone does extremely well, no cracks, and I have dropped the phone multiple times. Now, the S20 uses the same glass, Gorilla Glass 6, and is same structure, so it's a very, very strong. So I'm not worried about any of the phones. Compared to looks, I'll put a picture of the S20 on, so for you, you'll be seeing that. And for the S10 Plus and S10, they have a similar camera module. I've got my phone in blue. It's triple camera back, and for the S10 5G, which is totally separate, has one extra camera, but that's just for depth. It's not improving much apart from the battery and camera, and also the optional 5G. For cameras on the front, for another picture part of the S20, for the S10 Plus, you have dual camera on the front, so it does give extra depth, but the S20 lineup comes with a singular camera in the top center, which is less intrusive, but that's more on a personal opinion. For me, I do prefer the S20 camera. It's less intrusive. You can watch more on the display because of how less intrusive it is. But both phones are great, and it's just personal opinion. The S20 series is a great lineup. It has many amazing specs. However, the S10 Plus does come at a much cheaper price, with the S10 base model coming at a very low £669. Considering that was last year's flagship phone, it is an amazing price, and personally, if I was on a budget, I would go for the S10. However, if you have the money and you do worry about the specs such as cameras, speed, the S20 Plus and above only come with 5G, so you will get higher speed. Both phones come at the same memory for base. They both have expandable storage, and they both come with 128GB base storage. So they're both very impressive phones, and there's not many differences, including internals. The S20 does include a higher chipset. I'm in the Exynos region, and I can't remember the exact specifications, but it is a little bit higher, so it has higher benchmark scores, and that's pretty much it. If you have the money, I would go for the S20. It's much higher specifications. You know, if you worry about that kind of stuff, I'd go for the S20. Depends on which model. You can look further into that. But for the S10, if you want a lower price phone, but you want something that's good quality, I would go for the S10. It's been a very good phone for the past year. I'm still going to be using it until I see a phone with under display cameras, because that's what I'm waiting for. But for the comparison between these two series, I personally would go for whichever one suits you best, whichever comes to your needs, because both phones suit everything I need. Thanks for watching.